Hey guys, welcome to our YouTube channel. So in this video, I'll be talking about XPG S70 Blade SSD and how I integrated with an RGB heatsink. I made a couple of mistakes during the process which I wanted to share so that you don't repeat. I will be covering common pitfalls, how to assemble an SSD with an RGB heatsink, and at the end benchmark results of this SSD. And before we dive in, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I stream games every day and you can catch all the action on your short speed. If you don't like those videos, you can always turn off the channel notifications or simply just unsubscribe. Now let's get into today's video. A quick side note, if your SSDs are 80% full, then it is time to either upgrade or clear out some unnecessary data. Initially, I was planning to go with WD Green as it was much cheaper than the other two TB variants. However, TBW ratings of this SSD revealed why it was cheaper. TBW value of this SSD was 100 TB, which is significantly lower than the typical range, which usually lies between 400 to 1200 for 2 TB SSDs. I started comparing other alternatives and came up with these three SSDs. Crucial P3 had a TBW of 440, WD Black was at the end of the range with 1200, and XPG had an exceptional rating of 1480 TBs. So I went ahead with XPG. This SSD comes with a heatsink, which had a thermal pad already attached, which I didn't use. I love adding RGB to my setup, and I had already used an RGB heatsink on other SSD. Previously, I bought a heatsink from Asia Horse as it was the only option available at that time. So this time I went ahead with CoolMoon. The packaging includes a base metal heatsink, a screwdriver, two thin thermal pads, one thick thermal pad, 4 screws, and the RGB component. First of all, I started with the thick thermal pad. Ideally, you only need one thick thermal pad if you have blocks only on one side of the SSD. I used an extra thin thermal pad at the back, which wasn't necessary. A side note, don't forget to remove the plastic film from the pads and avoid touching them with your fingers. When adding the RGB block to the heatsink, I faced issues because I used combination of a thick and a thin thermal pad. You should use two thin thermal pads if you have circuits on both sides, or just one thick thermal pad if circuits are on one side only. I replaced the thick thermal pad with a thin thermal pad, and this time it aligned properly. Now it was time to put it in the system. I didn't have a M2 locker screw installed initially, which made the process a bit tricky due to limited clearance under the GPU. I quickly found the M2 locker screw in my motherboard's packaging box. I had to remove the GPU to install the M2 locker. Once that was done, adding the SSD was straightforward. Make sure to secure the SSD with the M2 locker key by moving the lock over the SSD as shown in the video. Now the only part remaining was attaching the RGB cable to the motherboard. Since I already had this NTEC switch, I connected the cable to the available slot. I did first round of testing and the RGB heatsink lit up well. But the SSD did not show up in the Explorer. So I went to disk management, initialized it with the GPT partition style, created a volume from the unallocated space, and it showed up in the Explorer. I ran benchmark test on my old WD Blue SSD for comparison, and then I ran benchmark on my new XPG SSD. The read-write speeds were as advertised, and here are the results. I also did a practical test by copying a 24 GB folder containing 2000 files, and the speed was limited to 2 Gbps, probably bottlenecked by old SSD. But it wasn't too bad, and only took a few seconds. Oh, and one more thing, I almost forgot to remove this blue protection film from the heatsink base. Make sure to remove this first. And we are done. This concludes our SSD and heatsink installation video. I hope you found this helpful, and if I missed anything, please let us know in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.